I'll see you guys in the dark.
This happened about a year ago now. I am a college student, and I was basically forced to move out on my own, which I didn't mind. But that meant finding a new roommate, which can be daunting and a scary experience. I've had a few weird encounters, but I think this one takes the cake. I posted on Craigslist looking for a bedroom in a shared house or apartment for $300 or less, and on my ad, I mentioned please no phone calls, only texts or emails, because I find being on the phone with someone I haven't had a chance to size up is a really uncomfortable situation. I'm just awkward, I guess. I got a call from a dude who clearly didn't read the no phone calls part, which I mentioned this because of the type of phone call was exactly the reason I don't talk to strangers on the phone. At first he was just pleasant and normal. He told me that he had a room available, and relevant information like that. We started to talk about when and where we'd meet, and he started going on tangents about random stuff. I'm a bit of a combination of too interested in deep conversation and too awkward to end the phone call when it starts getting weird. So this call went on for 2 hours, and we talked about the meaning of life and all kinds of weird stuff. Honestly, this should have been a red flag, and I shouldn't have met him, of course. I also should have grown a pair and told him I needed to leave. So he wants me to meet him at his place and show me the room. I've since learned that you should really insist on meeting in public first. I got to his neighborhood, and it was run down on a level that made the ghetto I grew up in look pretty nice. Saggy front porches, hot cracked concrete, sad people with old beat-up Lincolns. You get the picture. His house blended right in. The yard was seriously overgrown, and the front door didn't work. So I went around the back, and just looking at the guy standing in the doorway and seeing the kitchen behind him was enough to make me realize I just really wanted to leave. The guy in the doorway was a man with a sort of clown-style afro. He was leaning on the cane on his right side. His eyes looked crazy, and his house smelled musky from 10 feet away. Again, I'm a coward, so instead of trusting my gut, I go inside, and I'm polite thinking, it's okay, it'll be over in 20 minutes and then I can get the hell out. I don't know what made me think this man who had a 2-hour conversation with me about life and philosophy would let me go away that easily. He took me up a flight of creaky steps into a small bedroom with no door and a mattress on the floor. I thought no way in hell am I going to live with a 40-something-year-old man, and I was 19 female, and no door on my bedroom. But it was a moot point because my mind was made up before I even saw the room. I wouldn't have even lived there for free, let alone $200 a month. That's when things got weird. He tried to hold me hostage with conversation again. I think he was lonely. He talked about how some of his families were millionaires. He might have been delusional, I don't know. The whole story seemed a little made up. He started talking about some pretty creepy things, and that's when it was obvious to me that it was super uncomfortable. Eventually I was able to find a break in the conversation and pluck up the courage to make an excuse to leave. I'll never put myself in that type of situation again. But this guy really gave me the creeps. I'm a 27-year-old female, and this happened when I was 24. I lived in Los Angeles, and have for my entire life. I was feeling lonely, so I decided to go into Craigslist and try to find someone to hang out with. Not necessarily a date, but just someone to chill with. If it led somewhere, then so be it. That was my thinking. I emailed with a few guys, one of which stood out to me. He sent some pics and I was fine with how he looked, and he seemed nice enough. We agreed to meet up and go have coffee. It took him a bit longer than he said it would to get there, and once he did, I instantly regretted what I was doing. But being overly polite and feeling awkward, I went along. I got in his car, and instead of heading to the Starbucks as planned, he drove to a CVS. I was like, what are we doing here? To which he said he had to return some stuff to CVS, so that he had money. I was super uncomfortable already, and just wanted to get out of there, but again, my shyness got the better of me, and I just waited it out. Once he returned whatever it was he was returning, He then said he had to stop by his apartment. We pulled into his underground garage, and he said that he'd be right back. You don't know how badly I wish I had run out right then and there when he was gone, but I didn't. He got back in the car, and I could tell right away that he was high on an upper. Probably meth. Having been to rehab before myself, it was blatantly obvious. I told him I had gotten an emergency phone call while he was upstairs, and that I was sorry that I had to be taken back. I told him he could just drop me off at the nearest train station. I lived in a city like an hour away, so I wasn't about to have him drive me all the way home. He got on the freeway that was the fastest route to the train stop, but we ended up passing the exit. I had told him a few miles ahead of time which one it was, but he didn't say anything, seemingly ignoring me. I thought maybe he just didn't hear me. Hey, that was the exit actually, you just passed it, I said. Instead of pulling over to the right lanes, he kept pulling further and further over to the left, until we were all the way to the far left lane. I asked him what he was doing, trying to keep my cool. I can't honestly remember his exact words, but it was something along the lines of, "I'm not dropping you off, we're having sex. Why do you think I did this?" I looked at him with my jaw to the ground, and asked him, "So you were refusing to drop me off?" He said yes, and sped the car up. The first thing I thought of was obviously calling the police, so I pulled my cell phone out. He turned towards me and hit me in the face hard, and I dropped my phone because I was so shocked. The phone had fallen somewhere below his seat, somewhere I couldn't get to. I was panicking. As we continued to drive, and I tried desperately to think of what I should do, we came up on another interstate. For some reason, seeing the freeways intersect and seeing what we were about to get onto was hugely ominous for me, and I decided I could not let him get on the next freeway. I couldn't jump out of the car. I'd die instantly, so I did the only other thing I could think of. I took a breath and grabbed the steering wheel, turning it as hard as I could to the right. He was so shocked, he didn't even try to grab it back from me. We crashed into one car, then another car, and crashed into the side barrier. He turned towards me again and started hitting me while screaming. He called me a bitch a few times and told me I messed everything up. I put up my legs to block the blows from his fists, and it worked. I ended up falling backwards out of the car after managing to put my hand up and open the door. I ran to one of the cars we had crashed into, and it had pulled over behind us. The guy in the car had his phone out, presumably calling the cops. I knocked on his window screaming that psycho tried to kidnap me, and he rolled it all the way up. I couldn't believe it. When I looked back, the psycho was coming towards me. So I said, "Screw this, clearly no one wants to help," and I ran towards the fence. I'm already not in amazing shape, and was even weaker because of what just happened. So I literally had to lean on the fence until it bent enough for me to fall over it. Climbing up a chain link fence was not an option in that moment. Luckily, instead of following me, he ran in the other direction. He just left his car on the side of the freeway. Once I was over the fence, I realized that I was on some horse trails I was familiar with, because I had worked at an equestrian center nearby. So I just walked through the miles of trails until I got to the nearest city, which was Burbank, and called the cops from a bowling alley. I never figured out what happened to that psycho. The cops never told me after I made the report. But I hope he got in some kind of trouble for, trying to kidnap me. I recently acquired a new roommate. The entire situation should have never happened, but I needed someone to help me pay rent. So a Craigslist posting later, he moved in. His name was Greg, and he discloses to me that he did have some strange sleeping behaviors. Sleep talking, sleepwalking, night terrors. The funny thing was, I had also had a history of sleepwalking, but only on rare occasions. The first incident occurred about 1 week later, when I heard him screaming in the middle of the night. Since we both slept in separate rooms on different sides of the house, the screams sounded distant, but enough to scare me so much, I ran to check on him. As I'd get closer to his bedroom, he'd stop screaming, so I just went back to bed. For the next month, we had no issues. I noticed that he had no friends or family that would visit, and I never saw or heard him on the phone or texting. Then, another random night, Greg started screaming again. Same thing. I got up, started to go to his room, but he'd stop. And then one night, I was awoken by screaming in my bedroom. I couldn't see anything in the panic, so I turned on the bedside lamp, and he was at the foot of my bed wearing sleeping clothes. It scared me, so I started screaming and woke him up. He apologized and went back to bed. Then the scariest thing happened. About 2 nights later after that, I awoke to some clanking. It sounded like tools and hammers tapping. I turned on the light to see Greg kneeling down in the corner working on something with his hands. A few seconds after turning on the light, Greg froze, then slowly turned his upper body around and stared blankly at me while I laid in bed. I was beyond creeped out. So I slowly slid out of bed and left the house. After sleeping in my truck down the road in an empty church parking lot, I returned to the house about 8 in the morning. Greg was gone. All of his belongings were gone. No signs of him anywhere. It was like he never even lived there. I didn't know any of his friends or family, so I had no one to call about him. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. When I moved out after the lease was up, I was moving furniture out of my bedroom. In the corner of the room where I last saw Greg kneeling down, I realized the floor vent for the air conditioning was loose. Inside the floor vent was an envelope with a ton of pictures of me sleeping. The pictures had handwritten dates and times written on the back of them. The only other item was a whittled down wooden broom handle, brought to a point. I truly believed that Greg was preparing to kill me that night, and he realized it. Was it the sleepwalking Greg that was going to do it? Maybe he left to save my life. It appears Greg had been coming into my room almost nightly and working on making the broom handle a stabbing weapon, and I never heard anything until that last night I saw him. My girlfriend Kaylee and I decided to buy an apartment together. She was looking on Craigslist and saw a really luxurious penthouse apartment for only $300 a month. It was really nice as it looked over the city, and it had really nice bedding and a big bathtub, and just everyone's dream apartment. Kaylee calls the man who owns the apartment and said that he is happy to show her around the apartment, and she said, "My boyfriend and I are on the way." What's weird is that the man on the phone was like, okay, I didn't know that you were having people come with you. Alarms already started going off in my head when he said that. She said that we should just go see what it looks like and just leave. I agree, and we go to the apartment and wait outside. It was really rusty looking, and it had tall grass around it. We looked at the ad, and we both looked at each other as we saw a greasy-looking man come up to us. He had a white tank top on, with tan shorts and a rusty beard and braided hair. Kaylee and I were kind of looking at each other in disgust at this point. He pointed his finger at me and said, "You stay downstairs, young man." For me being from Canada and being young, I've never witnessed something like this in my entire life. Kaylee is from Australia, and she is pretty tough, so if this man tried anything, she would kick his ass. I waited downstairs, and I heard a faint scream coming from the basement. I didn't think too much of this, as I thought it might have just been a kid outside, but then I heard it again, and decided to call the police and tell them what was going on. They came after 20 minutes, and Kaylee pulls me outside and she says that she's not going to get this place, and I told her about the screams in the basement. The man was arrested, as he was wanted in another state, and the screaming downstairs came from a woman named Stephanie, who was also interested in the apartment. Kaylee said it was a crappy house with dirty clothes and women's clothing just scattered everywhere. I know now never to search for stuff on Craigslist ever again. Kaylee and I now live in a really nice rent-to-own home in Orange County, and all I have to say is, don't always believe what you see on Craigslist. You never know what kind of mastermind sicko lies beyond them.
I live in a small village in the very north of Scotland, so large shops and resources are a far distance. For that reason, I usually rely on internet shopping to get my needs. I needed to buy a bag for when I leave for university. One better than the one I already have. So I turned to Craigslist as I normally do. After looking for a short while, I came across a really good looking bag at only 15 pounds. I thought this was an absolute steal, so I phoned the seller. Immediately what struck me was the guy's accent. It was obvious that he wasn't Scottish, or even from the UK. He sounded Polish or something. He said he was from Glasgow. That's at least 5 hours by car from where I live. But when I told him the area I was from, he reluctantly offered to come by my house to give it to me. This all seemed strange because the sale was only 15 pounds. Nonetheless, I gave him my address. He said he'd drop by later on that day. Skipping forward about 7 hours to about 10 p.m., I was thinking that he wasn't going to come, but around 10:20 there was a chap on the door. Surprised that it was so late, I looked out the window to the front door, and sure enough, it was a young guy standing with a bag in his hand. Slightly relieved that it wasn't a robber, I went to the door and opened up. It was the guy from the phone for sure. The accent confirmed it. He said, "Hey, here it is." I smiled and took out my wallet, taking about 30 pounds because of the trouble he went to come here in and the condition of the bag. He smiled and opened his arms as if he wanted a hug. Being a gay guy, I rarely turned down a hug and just assumed it was a cultural thing. So I hugged him and he left. I was still confused that he came all this way just for 15 pounds, but I didn't find it overly strange. At around midnight, I was finished around another episode of 24 and was ready to go to bed. From outside the house, I heard a car door shut. I paused the TV and went over to the window to see who it was. I recognized the car as being the green sedan that the guy had. But he wasn't there. No one was. It was at that point when I heard the back gate opening. I nearly shat myself. I ran quietly to the kitchen where the back door is, staying low down the way there to avoid whoever it was seeing me from the kitchen window. I usually don't lock both doors till I go to bed, so both were still unlocked. I grabbed the key from the counter and quickly locked the door. As I did, I got a fright at the security light turning on in the backyard. I looked up to see that it was him again. He had a creepy smile on his face. No teeth showing. Just a smile. I stood up and shouted, "Whoa, dude, what the hell are you doing back there?" He said nothing, and just smiled, looking directly at me. I found myself just staring at him until the situation actually kicked in, and I took the keys from the back door and bolted to the front. About halfway to the front door, I heard the window smash in the kitchen. My stomach ached at the fact that he had already making his way into the house. I made a turn to go upstairs and towards the toilet so I could lock myself in there. When in the toilet, I heard him stumbling and breaking glass, falling to the floor. He was now in my house. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and quickly dialed 999. Told them of the situation as fast as I could, and they said they'll get the officers out there as fast as they could. The police station was just up from my village, so I knew someone would be here generally quick. The operator asked me to stay on the phone until someone arrived. I was focused on the guy's footsteps, which would slow down and speed up every so often. He eventually walked upstairs and tried to open the bathroom door. When he realized it was locked, he said, "Ah, I know you're in there, Cameron." Hearing him say my name made my stomach churn. I screamed, "The police are coming! Just back the fuck off, man!" After saying that, he started to kick the door. I backed up against it with more strength than I knew I had. Then in the distance, I heard the sirens and the blue lights reflecting from the bathroom window. He continued to kick the door, but then I heard the car doors outside open and fast footsteps. I heard the front door open and then a police officer with a taser yelled, "Drop the knife." Again, I felt sick knowing he had a knife. It sounded as if he started running back downstairs. Then I heard a taser and the guy screaming. Then a thump. After he came through, they officially arrested him for attempting murder and trespassing. I have pressed charges, but the fact is, he won't get any more than 7 months in jail. After that, he will be free to come right back. I am now trying to sell my house to get out of here as fast as possible.
I live in a small village in the very north of Scotland. so large shops and resources are a far distance. For that reason, I usually rely on internet shopping to get my needs met. I needed to go get a backpack for when I leave for university, one better than the one I already have, so I turned to Craigslist as I normally do. After looking for a short while, I came across a really good-looking bag only 15 pounds. I thought this was an absolute steal, so I phoned the seller. Immediately what struck me was this guy's accent. It was obvious that he wasn't Scottish, or even from the UK. He sounded Polish or something. He said he was from Glasgow. That's at least 5 hours from me by car from where I live, and when I told him the area, he reluctantly offered to come by my house to give it to me. This all seemed strange, being that the sale was only for 15 pounds. Nonetheless, I foolishly gave him my address. He said he'd drop it by later on that day. Skipping forward about 7 hours to like 10 p.m. or something like that. I was thinking that he wasn't going to come around at all, but around 10:20, there was a clap at the door. Surprised that it was so late, I looked out of the window round to the front door, and sure enough, it was a young guy standing there with a backpack in his hand. Slightly relieved that it wasn't a robber, I went to the door and opened it up. It was the guy on the phone for sure. The accent confirmed it. He said, "Hey, here it is." I smiled and took out my wallet, taking out 30 because of the trouble he went to come here, and the condition of the bag. He smiled and opened up his arms as if he wanted a hug. I rarely turned down a hug, and just assumed that it was a cultural thing, so I hugged him and he left. I was still confused that he came all the way here just for 15 pounds, but I didn't find it overly strange. Hell, I think I was wrong. At around midnight, I was finishing up an episode of TV and was ready to go for bed. From outside the house, I hear a car door shut. I paused the TV and went over to the window to see who it was. I recognized the car as being a green sedan that the guy had, but he wasn't there. No one was. It was at this point that I heard the back gate open. I nearly crapped myself. I ran quietly to the kitchen where the back door was, staying low to avoid whoever it was seeing me from the kitchen window. I usually don't lock both doors till I go to bed, so both were still unlocked. I grabbed the keys from the counter and quickly locked the door. As I did, the security light turned on and freaked me out. I looked up to see that it was him again. He had a creepy smile on his face, no teeth showing, just a smile. I stood up and shouted, "Whoa, dude, what the hell are you doing back here?" He said nothing and just smiled, looking directly at me. I found myself just staring at him until the whole situation actually kicked in, and I took my keys from the back door and bolted to the front door to lock it. About halfway to the front door, I heard a window smash in my kitchen. My stomach ached at the fact that he's probably making his way into the house. I turned to go upstairs towards the toilet so I could lock myself in there. When in the toilet, I heard him stumbling around and broken glass falling to the floor. He was now in my house. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and quickly dialed 999, told them of the situation as fast as I could, and they said that they'd get officers out there as fast as possible. The police station was just up from my village, so I knew someone would be here generally quick. The operator asked me to stay on the phone until someone arrived. I was focused on the footsteps, which would slow down and speed up every so often. He eventually walked upstairs and tried to open the bathroom door. When he realized that it was locked, he said, "Ah, I know you're in there, Cameron." Hearing him say my name made my stomach churn. I yelled at him that the police are coming and just to back off. After saying that, he started to kick the door. I backed up against it with more strength than I knew I had. Then in the distance, I heard sirens and saw the blue lights reflecting from the bathroom windows. He continued to kick the door, but then I heard the car doors outside open and fast footsteps. I heard the front door open, and then the police yelling, "Police," with a taser, dropped the knife. Again, I felt sick knowing that he had a knife. It sounded as if he started running back downstairs. Then I heard some guy yelling taser, and the guy screaming, then a thump. I have pressed charges, but the fact is that he won't get any more than 7 months in jail. After that, he will be free to come right back. I'm now trying to sell my house and get out of there as fast as possible.
Years ago, when I was about 13, I made a post on Craigslist advertising babysitting services as a way to make some money. The morning after I made the post, I got a phone call from a man supposedly interested in hiring. As soon as I heard his voice, I got an anxious feeling. He was whispering very low and kind of slow the entire time. It was extremely off-putting. Sounded like he was middle-aged. So we exchanged hellos, and he says that he's calling about and asks what I'm charging. He asks my name, all sorts of weird questions. So anyways, he says he has a young son for whom he needs a babysitter. Then he begins asking me about my experience, and then strangely diving into overly lengthy descriptions of his own life. I don't remember the details of the conversation, but I do remember one thing. He asks extremely clearly, "Now, my son, sometimes he likes to touch himself. That wouldn't bother you, would it?" In his creepy, low, slow voice. I just remember being filled with anxiety at that and wanting to hang up immediately. It was just sort of beyond TMI. His voice and tone really made it a lot worse. He sounded serious, but at this point, I was partially convinced that this was some sort of prank, and I was almost certain he didn't have a kid. I had no idea how to respond to that, and even though this was on the phone, me being a stupid and at that point a petrified 13-year-old kid, I just responded with, "No," and I'm sure he realized how nervous I sounded because he just kind of gave a low chuckle and continued on. Because you know how little boys are. Honestly, a lot of details of that conversation are blurred, and it went by fairly quickly. I just remember kind of nodding off and yesing my way to the end when he asked my availability and said he would give a call back. He ended it with, "Okay, thanks," with a little chuckle and hung up. I can't remember whether he gave me his info or not, but I am pretty sure he did not call back. I do remember jumping onto my computer and taking my ad down as soon as possible. I felt like complete crap after that phone call, and wondered whether that was a normal discussion for an adult to try and have with a potential child babysitter. Definitely glad I never met this dude. Terrible, terrible vibes just through the phone.
When I was 21, I transferred to a college in San Francisco. I checked out a room for rent on Craigslist. It was in a really nice 2-bedroom apartment. It was cheap rent and close to campus, so it was the ideal spot. The girl who lived there was 29, and her name was Beth. She was tall and wide, and she had jet black hair and wore pale makeup. She seemed nice, although a little quiet, but she seemed to like me and agreed to let me move in. So far, so good. My first night there, we went out for pizza, and that's when I could tell something was a bit off with her. Throughout dinner, she kept telling me how much I looked like Shia LaBeouf. I didn't know what to say, so I just shrugged it off with a thanks, I guess. I mean, I looked nothing like Shia LaBeouf, so it didn't make any sense to me. When we got back home, she asked me if I had seen her room yet. I told her no, so she took me to go see it. Her walls were covered in posters of Shia LaBeouf. She even had printout photos of him all over her mirror. She owned all of his movies. I didn't know what to make of it. It was creepy. The whole night she had been saying I look like him, and now it's obvious to me that she's obsessed with the guy. A few weeks passed, and I never really saw her that much. We didn't spend any time together, really. She would come home from work and practically run to her room. She would spend the whole night in there. She had this creepy high-pitched giggle, and I would hear her giggling through her walls at night and wonder what the hell she could possibly be doing. Occasionally she would come out and talk for like 2 minutes, and then she would always be slurring her words, so I suspected she was drinking a lot. Sometimes I wouldn't say anything, and she would just stand in the hallway and watch me in the living room. I would turn to her and be surprised and say, "Hello, Beth," and then there would be this long, awkward pause, and she would give me this creepy, high-pitched giggle. It was uncomfortable being around her. She gave me the chills. One night I woke up around 2 a.m. because I heard what sounded like the front door being unlocked. I came out of my bedroom, and all the lights were off, but I could still see Beth standing at the front door. She had her face against it, and she was turning the lock back and forth over and over again, and every time she turned the bolt, she mumbled my name. Max Barker. Max Barker. Seeing her standing in the dark and mumbling my name really freaked me out, and it doesn't help that she kind of looks like a bigger version of the girl from The Ring. I just quietly went back to my room and tried to sleep. One night I was watching Gladiator, and she stumbled out of her room and turned on the living room light, forcing me to pause the movie, which was very annoying. She then asked me if I wanted to hear about her ex-boyfriend. It was an uneasy segue into the topic, but I just said sure and then awkwardly sat back and listened to her. 10 minutes into her story and she was so riled up. She was screaming at the top of her lungs about their breakup. I was worried that the neighbors were going to call the cops, and she wasn't listening to me when I asked her to lower her volume. Amidst all of her screaming, one thing she said really freaked me out. She was in such a fit and yelled, "I'll slit his throat." That was the big game changer. Suddenly I had no idea what this girl was capable of. She was practically a stranger, and everything I had seen was becoming alarmingly disturbing. After a few more minutes, she told me thanks for listening, and she started doing her little giggle. I got out of there pretty fast and went to my room to go to sleep. I had a pretty unsettling feeling about being in the house with her, and what's worse is that there was no lock on my bedroom door. I pushed the edge of my dresser in front of it to act as a little barricade. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my dresser scraping against my floor. Beth was pushing my door open. I turned on my light, shouting at her to stop. I could see her through the opening of the door. She was so drunk, and she had this insane look in her eyes. I pushed the door closed and yelled for her to go to bed. I could hear her walk back to her room, but I couldn't fall back asleep after that. The next morning I went out into the hallway, and my heart dropped. I saw one of her steak knives was on the floor by my door. I got goosebumps all over my arms. All I could think about was her saying that she would slit this guy's throat. I confronted her about it, and she said she didn't remember trying to push my door open. She said she didn't even remember telling me about her ex. I had enough. My lease was month to month, so I found a new spot and moved out. About a month after I moved out, she contacted me. I was at the movies and my phone was off. When I got out, I turned my phone on, and to my shock, I received 40+ text messages that she had sent me over the past 2 hours. They were all just insane texts that ranged from everything in between, "Hi, how are you?" to "I hate you." It was insane. I didn't respond, and I never heard from her again. I always wondered if I hadn't set my dresser in front of my door, would she have quietly come into my room and slit my throat? It freaks me out to this day. My name is Tom, and I live in the St. Louis area, and this is a horror story about something that happened to me that almost messed my life up forever. When I was 21 years old, I broke up with my first ever serious girlfriend, who I'd been together with for 8 months. Needless to say, I was devastated. I fell into a deep depression, and I began abusing painkillers and Xanax really heavily, and I began looking for any chick I could find to rebound with. I ended up looking on the personal section on Craigslist, and found an ad for a girl named Stephanie. I began talking to her, and I arranged for her to come pick me up at night. We had intercourse that night, and decided to make it a regular thing. She was an older lady about 35, and a bigger girl, but she had her own apartment and enough money to keep me loaded on enough drugs and alcohol as I wanted. To be honest, I kind of used this lady and used her as my sugar mama, for a lack of a better word. After a while, she grew really attached to me and started to want a more serious relationship. Eventually, she started dropping hints about wanting to get married. She said she wanted to do this to help me out, so she could get me on her insurance, so I can get help for my drug and alcohol problem, which I refuse to consider. One day we got into a huge argument, and she told the police I had been abusing her, and got a temporary restraining order on me. A week after she did this, she called me crying her eyes out, saying, "Please forgive me, I love you," and all this other stuff, and she wanted to come pick me up and buy some dope and alcohol, and get me something to eat. And being the addict that I was, of course, I accepted. From the moment she picked me up, I noticed that she was acting kind of odd. She was usually really talkative, and was always on my ass and wanting to talk to me about this and that. But on this day, she was oddly quiet. When we got back to her apartment after I walked in, she immediately pushed me down on the couch and pulled my pants down, and started going at it. She then climbed on top of me and began writing. I had been getting bad vibes off her the whole night, so after this happened, I immediately asked her for a ride back home, which she quickly agreed to do so. After I got dropped off at the house, I went inside and sat down with my sister and watched some SpongeBob with her. About 10 minutes after I was home, I got a call on the phone. I picked up the phone, and to my surprise, a lady on the other end said it was the St. Louis County Police Department, and they were going to need me to come outside and talk to me. I ran downstairs and hid my weed and pills, and then walked outside to figure out what the hell was going on. When I walked outside, there was about 7 different cops on my porch, and they were all pointing tasers and guns at me. One of them hit me in the back of the leg with a nightstick and put me on the ground, and I was handcuffed. The cops then talked to my mom and got permission to go inside of the house, where they took a drug dog and began doing a thorough search of my room and my basement area. None of the cops on the scene would tell me what was going on, or whenever I would ask a question about why they were there, they told me I would have to talk to the detective at the station. When I got to the police station, I had a bombshell dropped on me. Apparently, this lady had accused me of kidnapping her and handling her. She told the police that she had come by my house to return some of my stuff because we had just broken up, and that I had come out holding a knife through her throat, and forced my way into her vehicle and took her back to her apartment and handled her repeatedly. Hell of a story. Thankfully, I remember that we made a couple of stops on the way to her apartment. She had gone inside of a gas station to get a couple of packs of cigarettes with me, so there was no way I could have kidnapped her. The police still swabbed me for DNA, and they also took my clothes for the evidence, and I was forced to spend the night in St. Louis County Jail, wearing nothing but hospital scrubs. I was released the next morning, but my ordeal was far from over. This lady had begun constantly stalking me. She would call me every night at odd times from blocked numbers, and even crying into the phone or just begging to talk to me. I also began seeing her vehicle quite a bit in the neighborhood, even though she lives nowhere close to me. I called the police about this a couple of times, but they really didn't seem to care. They told me that I would have to go get a restraining order on her in order to make it stop. I wanted nothing to do with this court system because I have a criminal record, and I just decided to ignore her, and I hoped that the problem would go away. After a couple of months, she finally did stop bothering me. However, to this day I still sometimes get 2 or 3 calls in the morning from blocked numbers. Every new girlfriend I get, she messages them on Facebook and tell them how I handled her. Moral of the story: be careful who you meet online, especially Craigslist. Whether you're a guy or girl, all it takes is one crazy person to ruin your life.
Not too long ago, I put up a post on Craigslist asking to either sell or trade my fish tank for a smaller one. I put in my phone number as a contact source and asked to text only. After a couple of hours, I got a text from somebody who was willing to trade. We agreed to meet at a Walmart in a couple of days when we were both free and do our trade. During those days, the guy kept on texting me, involving a small talk. He asked me about my name and where I worked, etc. And me being foolish, answered this. I used Craigslist often, and I had never really had a bad experience with anyone, so I never really thought this guy was weird. I saw him more like friendly. I told this guy what car I drove and what college I went to again, never really stopping to think what kind of info I was giving to a total stranger. When the day came to meet this guy, he told me he could only meet after 10 p.m. I thought that was odd, but agreed to meet him anyway since my poor fish were already stuck in a 5-gallon jug. So me and my boyfriend drove to the Walmart at about 10:15 and got there in about 20. The guy texted me and said he was already there in an old yellow Camaro. I replied saying we were both two in a gray van. He then texted me and said, "Who is we?" At that moment, I realized something was really off with this guy, and I replied by saying, "My husband and me." That was a lie, but I felt he should know I wasn't alone. He never responded after that text. My boyfriend and I went to the parking lot a couple of times looking for the yellow Camaro, but we never found it. I tried calling the guy, and he ignored my calls. We decided it was best to just leave. I don't know what could have happened if I met this creepy guy by myself, or even with my boyfriend there, but I have a feeling it would have not been something good. I removed the post from Craigslist that night, and saved the creep's phone number just in case he tried contacting me again. A couple of weeks later, I got a text from several different phone numbers asking about the tank. I never responded to anybody because I believe it was the same guy since I, for one, deleted the post immediately. I hope he can't somehow track my phone, and of course, I'm not using Craigslist ever again. I really love Craigslist. I'd estimate that I've met maybe 300 people from buying or selling stuff, and for the most part, everyone was nice and harmless. However, I did run into 2 creeps who made me rethink meeting strangers alone to sell stuff. FYI, I was in my early 20s at the time. The first guy, it's 2009, and I'm staying with my parents for the Christmas holiday in a small town in Florida. I'm going through my childhood room and cleaning out the closet and find a giant CD holder full of maybe 100 really shitty CDs. It's the 21st century. No one uses CDs anymore. I figured I'd try to sell the CDs on Craigslist. I put up a listing, 100 CDs from the late 90s and early mid-2000s, mix of pop and rock, all for $35 or best offer. The next day I get an email from a guy named John around 2 p.m. He says that he's in town temporarily and that he wants the CDs. He says he can pick them up after dinner around 8. I email him back my address and number and tell him to text or call when he's on his way. 8 p.m. comes around. I figure I've been stood up, which happens often on Craigslist. No big deal. My dad works for a liquor distribution company and would often do demonstration nights at restaurants and bars and would come home at bar closing time. This night, he gets home at around 3 a.m. I'm in college and a total night owl, so I'm still up probably eating junk food, surfing the web, watching horror flicks. I hear a car pull up. I look out the window and see him sitting in his car eating food. He often stops at Taco Bell on his way home and eats it in his car so my mom doesn't know he's cheating on his diet. Maybe 10 minutes later, my dad comes in and shouts my name. "There is someone here to see you. Can you please tell me why a stranger is showing up at my house at 3 a.m.? Huh? I run downstairs and my dad says some guy pulled up in the driveway and asked for me by name. I walk outside with my dad, and this guy is with maybe mid-30s gets out of his car. He says he's the Craigslist guy who wanted to buy my CDs. My dad goes back in the house. I tell the guy it's really, really late to just be stopping by, especially without texting first. However, since I'm awake, I go and grab the CDs. He then proceeds to drone on and on about why he's buying the CDs. He says he's engaged to a woman he loves very much, and all he wants to do is make her happy. He said that last week, someone broke into her car and stole all of her CDs. She was really upset and wanted to make it up to her. He looked on Craigslist and found my listing and was really excited because I had a bunch of CDs she used to have. Weird thing is, I didn't list any of the artists or bands because I was lazy, but I didn't think about that at the time. Anyway, he said he was getting it for her as a Christmas gift. He said he was staying with his future in-laws somewhere nearby and their family barbecue ran really late, which is why he never made it at 8 p.m. At this point, I've lost interest and say something along the lines of, "That's sweet. Next time, you should probably call or text the Craigslister instead of just showing up." I hand him the CDs, he hands me the cash, and I go back inside. 3 days later, I start getting texts from an unknown number. "Hey, I don't know my way around this town. Care to tour guide? I could really use a massage. Where can I get a massage in this town? You're Asian. Do you massage? Would you take $40 for an hour? Happy ending?" Me. "Who the hell is this?" "Oh, I'm sorry. I bought the CDs from you the other day. Do you squirt?" I didn't respond, obviously. I show my friends that night and we laugh it off. Then the next day I get more texts. "I still have your address. I'm at the Bank of America near your neighborhood. I just got the 40, babe. Only 3 minutes away. Are you home? You fucking cunt. Stop ignoring me. I'm almost there." I immediately run downstairs to tell my dad and mom. It was nighttime, so we shut off all the lights outside and inside the house. My mom, little brother, and I went in my parents' room in the back of the house. My dad hid behind the curtains of the front bay window with a shovel in his hand. A few minutes later, I heard him run down the front hallway, fling the front door open, and run outside. We heard some faint shouting, so we all walked out of the bedroom. By that time, my dad came back in with his shovel, his face red and his hair disheveled. Apparently, the guy came driving down our street really slow. My dad recognized the car and went running outside with the shovel, yelling obscenities at the guy. The guy peeled off and never came back or texted me again. The second guy. I was moving from Florida to D.C., and I was going to load up my car as much as I could with stuff. However, I lived on the 3rd floor, plus a bit of a walk from my assigned parking spot, so I figured I could use some help. I posted an ad on Craigslist. I said I was looking for someone to help me load some heavy stuff, like TVs, desks, etc. in my car. Less than an hour's worth of work, and I'd pay $45. I'd give the very first responder my number and address. He shows up. He was probably about 5'8", 350 pounds of pure fat. The sweat and smell coming off this guy in the Florida heat was pretty nauseating, but I didn't care as long as he did the job right. While he was carting heavy stuff, I was loading lighter things. Whenever I'd go upstairs to grab another load, he'd hurry up after me so he could walk to the stairs behind me. I had the door propped open so he didn't have to worry about me needing to unlock the door for him or anything. When he'd follow me upstairs, he made these weird grunting noises like, mm-hmm, but I assumed it was because he was out of shape. Eventually everything's loaded properly, save for some sweat smears on my stuff. I pay him and he drives off. I go back in my place to finish loading and cleaning. I go about 45 minutes later to put another load in my car, and I see his truck is back, parked across the street from mine. He's sitting in the driver's seat, looking at me. When he sees me notice him, he looks away. I walk over to his window and knock. He rolls it down and asks if I need help or if it was lost, and I ask if he needs help or if he was lost. I was really confused as to why he had come back, and I knew he didn't live near here. He didn't say anything, just rolled his window back up and drove off. Okay, whatever. Of course, 5 minutes later, my phone starts blowing up. I don't recognize the number, so I don't answer the calls. Then texts start rolling in. Him, I bet you taste salty and sweet. Me, who is this? Him, your pussy. Him, what are you up to tonight? I can come back over. I get the sinking feeling it's the Craigslist guy. He had never called me about the job when I gave him my number, so I didn't know what his number was. Him, I like your pink panties. Then I realized he was looking at my dress when I was walking up the stairs. I immediately feel like a total idiot for wearing a dress that day. He then started dialing my number over and over again. I didn't know how to block numbers through Sprint, so I had to just turn my phone off. Later, I was with my guy friend grabbing a bite and turned my phone back on. I got another text from the guy about how he wanted to toss me around like a rag doll and tie me up and make me beg for it. I show the text to my friend and tell him the story. The Craigslist creep then proceeds to start blowing up my phone again. So my friend answers and says he is going to cut his dick off and feed it to his dog if he ever contacts me again. I moved the next day, so I never had to worry about him randomly showing up in his truck again. Since then, I've bought and sold stuff on Craigslist, but I always make sure people meet me at a public place. I also stalk people's email addresses, Google Plus accounts, and etc.
A few weeks ago, I had to fly out to a small town I'd never been to in order to look for a place to live. I'm moving there in the fall to start grad school. My boyfriend flew with me, and before I took the trip, I researched all sorts of different apartments on Craigslist and set up a bunch of appointments. Our first appointment was in the afternoon in this sort of remote residential area. The landlord sounded fine over email and asked me to call him an hour before the appointment to confirm that I was coming. I called, but he didn't answer. So my boyfriend and I started walking to the house and just hoped that he would show up. Maybe 10 minutes before the appointment, he called me. "Are you coming?" he asked. He sounded like an older man, in this very strange, slow-talking kind of way. He got extremely upset. "We?" "Oh yes, my boyfriend's with me." "You never told me you had a boyfriend. You never said that." It had never crossed my mind that I had to tell him this information. Since my boyfriend would not be coming to live with me, he was just helping me look for apartments on the trip. I told the man so, and after a very long pause he said, "I'm sorry, it's just sometimes people don't tell me when they're married, and it surprises me. I'll see you soon." Then he hung up. I told my boyfriend about what the man had said, and he immediately was weirded out. He wanted to leave, but there was slim pickings in terms of real estate at this point, so I stupidly said that we had to stay, in case this place was the place. As we were discussing it, we see a man leave the house we're going to view. This man was young and extremely sketchy looking, greasy hair, furtive eyes. He took one look at us and ran out of the house to his car and pulled away from the curb with a screech. Okay, so now we're really weirded out. But this isn't enough for us to bail just yet. And as we look at each other wondering what to do, the landlord arrives. He's in his 50s, very tall and strong looking. His eyes were completely blank and empty of warmth or emotion. He slowly walks up to us and says, "I'd shake your hand, but mine are dirty." "From what?" my boyfriend asks. "Work," is the flat reply that we got. He asks us a lot of questions about me, completely ignoring my boyfriend. The entire time he stares into my eyes without blinking. What am I going to school for? What other places am I considering for living? Is my boyfriend moving to this town too? I try to give answers that are as vague as possible. Meanwhile, my boyfriend asks the landlord questions of the same kind, which he refuses to answer. He then says, "Let me show you the basement." At this point, I should have gotten the hell out of there, but I didn't. I kept thinking that this was an eccentric old man from a small town. We're city folk, and that we were just feeling paranoid. My boyfriend, on the other hand, wanted out of there, bad. But he followed us as the man led us into the back of the house, away from the street, to this sort of detached shed. He opened the door, and what we saw there was stairs leading down into utter darkness. He flipped the switch at the top of the stairs, and the light did not come on. Normally the response for this is, "Oh shit, the light's out," or something like that. But he just said, and slowly walked down into the darkness. He then stood there without moving in the dark and said, "Aren't you coming down?" "There's nothing to see if the light's out," says my boyfriend. The landlord just stands there for a long time, then slowly walks back up the stairs and closes the basement door without saying anything. He then took us into the house. Weird and increasingly creepy things ensued. The front door, the only exit to the house, locked automatically, and when my boyfriend tried to fiddle with it, the man got really upset and told him to leave it alone. He managed to secretly get it open though. The man kept trying to box us into small rooms and, according to my boyfriend, kept reaching his hands into his pockets, only to take them out when he caught us looking. On Craigslist and in person, the man claimed that there was a grad student already living in the house, but the evidence of that seemed arranged. There were neat piles of generic textbooks on the table, but not other things a 20-something might read. There was a bowl of fruit on the table, but no other food in the fridge or pantry, or utensils. There were maybe about 3 t-shirts in the closet. This supposed grad student wasn't out of town, but the landlord couldn't say what school he went to or how long he'd been renting the house. Finally, the man showed us every single room in the house but one. This one he refused to open, claiming it was just the attic, and we didn't need to see anything up there. He gave us several reasons when we inquired. It was unfinished. There was furniture up there. It would smell bad. This last one I believed, because standing near the door, it smelled terrible. Finally, we made our excuses and bolted out of there. The man walked us out, pretended to get into his car and leave, and when he thought we had turned the corner, slowly sauntered back into the house. My boyfriend, fixated on the idea that there was something wrong with this guy, Googled the man that night. We found out 3 things. That he was a pillar of the community, known by a lot of the townspeople, that there was no evidence of him owning or managing a real estate company, as he claimed on Craigslist, and that he had listed his home address as the very house that we had been touring, the house where the grad student lived. So that was the creepiest thing that ever happened to me. This happened last year around this season, while I was broke and struggling to make ends meet. I had just moved out, and I didn't want to resort to going back to my parents. Anyways, I was so desperate, I was looking on Craigslist for caregiver and housekeeping type gigs, just to make some quick cash while I looked for an FT position. After responding to several, I got a bite back from a man who had advertised as a disabled man who needed help with his morning and evening routines since he had a bad back. As a past caregiver, I thought nothing of his request to help with bathing and dressing, since I knew it could be difficult for some. After chatting on the phone, and coming to the conclusion that he was nice and normal, I proceeded to head over to his townhouse late one night to help him with his nighttime routine. He lived a bit out of the way from me, but I was desperate, and I didn't mind. He even said I could spend the night, since he needed me in the morning anyway. Once I got there, he was a decent-looking man in his late 30s or early 40s, with a cane. He paid me $200 up front for the expected nighttime and morning routine the next day. He explained that he was ex-military, and he had a back surgery recently. Things started to get weird once he offered me some wine and commented on how cute he thought I was. I should have seen that as a big red flag. But again, I was super poor, and I didn't want to cheat him, so I gave him the benefit of the doubt. He then led me to his bedroom, where he got undressed for his evening shower. I was horrified, since I saw that he already had a giant erection, and he wanted me to lather him up. He asked me if I wanted to take my clothes off, and I declined. He responded respectfully. However, he did touch my butt when I bent over to pick something up for him. I should have ran out right there, but I was waiting for the right moment. After quickly giving him the most unsexy shower in the most platonic way I could, he got out and said that he was heading to bed, but he didn't want to wear any clothes. The guest room where I was to stay was right next to his, and though I was tired, I was still pretty on edge. My gut instinct was telling me to get the hell out of there. The issue was that we were on a 3-story townhouse, and we were on the top floor, and he had installed baby gates on each floor so his cat wouldn't run away. He had also turned off all the lights on the lower floors, so it was pitch black. In order for me to get out, I'd have to pass his room. I quietly arranged my stuff in my purse while I heard his TV blaring, and to my horror, I saw him walk swiftly to the bathroom without his cane. I realized that he was not as disabled as he told me, since he had previously put on an act as if he couldn't walk without it. He also still had his heart on and was holding a giant bottle of lotion. As quickly as I could, I fled and ran like hell out of the room while he was in the bathroom and jumped like an Olympic sprinter over the cat gates down the dark stairs. As I threw the front door open to run to my car, I heard his house alarm go off. I got into my car as fast as lightning, heart beating like crazy. I immediately got phone calls from his number, and every car that trailed me had me terrified until I got out of there. Finally, after a 2-hour drive, I was back to my place and grateful I was out of there. Who knows what could have happened if I stayed overnight, but I didn't want to stay to find out. I'm 31 female and a single mom. I posted an ad on Craigslist in the strictly platonic section, as I'm not looking for a serious relationship, rather a cool guy to spend time with and go from there. I had tried other dating sites, but I wasn't getting anywhere. The Craigslist in my area is a lot more tame than in most cities, and I felt safe using it with a fake email address and a fake name attached. After placing my ad, I got about 20 or so replies. I could quickly narrow down my choices by eliminating people who clearly didn't read my entire ad, were too old, or just didn't put any effort into their reply. I found 2 that I felt like I had a lot in common with, Chris and Jay, and so I gave them my number to text initially. Jay and I texted every day for about a week. He texted way faster than me, and more often. 2 or 3 texts back to back. It was overwhelming for me, and he almost always went from, "What kind of music do you like?" to "What type of panties do you wear?" in just 2 texts or less. Of course I didn't answer the ones I felt were too personal, and I always told him that I wasn't okay with those type of texts. He would apologize, but do the same thing the next day. After a week, I agreed to actually talk to him over the phone, even though at this point I was a little bit creeped out by his pushy personality. So he calls, and immediately upon hearing his voice, I get goosebumps, and not the good kind. The hair on the back of my neck and arms raised up and I felt sick. His voice was higher pitched than I expected, and I could hear the excitement in it. It's hard to describe, but he sounded too loud, and the way he put his sentences together had a weird flow. I, of course, was polite and mostly just listened to him talk. After about 10 minutes, he revealed that he was actually in an unhappy marriage and had 2 kids, one of which was severely autistic and hard to manage. All facts I was not aware of before. He also said that he had some type of anger issue that he is taking medication for. Something about having an uncontrollable rage. For me, that was all I needed to hear. He was a big nope. I had the feeling the whole time that I needed to hang up on this guy, change my number, and move to another town, country even. But I remained polite and cut the conversation short without seeming too desperate just to get away. Just hearing his voice sent me into emergency abort mode. I did not attempt to text or call him, and I didn't answer any more of his. I ghosted him, I guess you could say. After a week or so, I forgot about him for the most part. I had been texting and talking with this other guy, Chris, and we were really hitting it off, and I was busy with my everyday life as a working mom. Fast forward about a month and a half, and I see a mugshot on the local news. Jay was arrested that morning for soliciting a minor. A detective posing as a 12-year-old little girl had been talking to him for the past month. Jay had posted his own ad on Craigslist and apparently didn't mind talking to a child. He sent nudes to an undercover cop, and he was caught when they set up a place to meet to make babies. Yes, he is quoted on having said that. Needless to say, my skin literally crawled at that moment. I should point out that I knew this was him because he stupidly used his real full name when replying to my email and sent me a photo. So I of course looked him up on social media before talking to him. Thank God I listened to my intuition and cut off our conversations when I did. The mere thought of him just turns my stomach, and I will never use Craigslist to find a date ever again. And I am thankful that we never actually met in person.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.